Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth Stronger Together Lunch and Learn for this year. My name is Amy Close, and I am the director of Stronger Together, Boston's Jewish Day School Collaboration Initiative. The idea for these lunch and learns came out of conversations with school leaders about how we do professional development. We agreed that it can be nice to bring in outside presenters, but we also recognize that there's tremendous talent right here in our very own schools, and we wanted to be able to leverage that talent for the benefit of the community whenever we can. So we created this bi-monthly series as an opportunity to showcase what our schools do best and to give our teachers and our administrators the opportunity to teach and learn from one another. While it would be amazing if we could all be together in person and have lunch together, logistically, that's just not possible. So while doing this on Zoom is not ideal, I hope that we can sort of pretend that we're sitting informally around a table and sharing a meal. I encourage you to remain on camera if you can and eat your lunch or drink your coffee, whatever you need to do. As always, we'll have about an hour together. The first 30 minutes or so will be a presentation, and then the rest of the time will be an opportunity for informal Q&A and discussion. Just to note that we are recording this session so that folks who are not able to join us live can watch it later on. Our presenters today are Helen Ressler and Scott Harrison, and they'll be speaking with us this afternoon about the interdisciplinary civil rights curriculum that they created for middle schoolers at Rashi. Let me tell you a little bit about Helen and Scott, and then I'll hand it over to them. Helen Ressler teaches Jewish studies for grades 6 and 7 at the Rashi School. She graduated from the Pardes Institute Day School Educators Program in Jerusalem. And prior to her teacher training, she earned an MDiv from Vanderbilt and a bachelor's degree in history and astronomy from Wellesley College. She's a proud Southern Jew and seeks to inspire students to ask questions, care deeply, and engage in argument for the sake of heaven. Scott Harrison teaches social studies for grades 6 and 7 at Rashi. He holds a doctorate and a master's degree in European history from the University of Illinois and a bachelor's degree in secondary education from Marist College. He believes deeply that humanities learning is social emotional learning, and he works to foster collaborative learning environments in which students face each other as co-equals. Welcome, Helen and Scott, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. So here we have a little hook for you. So here I aggregated data of just from demographic data of four different separate but neighboring public school districts in one state in the United States. Percentage of students who are white, percentage of students who are Black. So go ahead, type it in the chat. What state contains these four cities that are 10 miles within a 10-mile radius that still have such a strong disparity in terms of racial segregation? Anyone have any guesses? Texas, right? Or Massachusetts? Any other guesses other than Miss Charton?
I mean, it could be Massachusetts.
It could be Massachusetts. That is, in fact, what it is. Oh, I gotta click on it, I guess. It is the great state of Massachusetts. I know, I am such a great trickster. When we were planning this unit, something that we came across is a lot of students, particularly at our school, have this understanding that civil rights and the civil rights unit or civil rights era is something that particularly only happened in the 1960s, 1950s, and is only something that happened in the South. And this is actually the reality of most of our students at our school. A great majority of our students live in one of these public school districts, either the Boston, the Brookline, the Newton, the Needham. We also have many others, but these are kind of the big ones. And when they are going off to high school, we are a pre-K to 8 school. When they're going off to high school, this is some of the reality of some of the high school demographics that they will experience, where they will be part of the white majority of the school. And so when we are teaching about things related to inner city busing or about racial desegregation in schools, they don't necessarily understand how that might relate to them. And so part of our revamp of this unit is about building those bridges and revitalizing that curriculum, connecting that Black and Jewish stories of the civil rights area here for them in Boston. So what do we do? What do these students bring with them?
Um, Thanks so much for that intro, Helen. And Helen I just want to compliment Helen and thank her for her collaboration. We've worked together over the course of a summer to develop this shared Jewish studies and social studies unit. And Helen just took 3 whole months of work and distilled it really beautifully into a hook and an opening. So thanks for that. And thanks for having us here today. We're thrilled to be here from the Rashi School. So thank you, Amy, and everyone for joining us. So to answer Helen's question, what prior knowledge do our grade 7 students carry into learning about civil rights? Helen and I are of the sense that our students are very used to learning and thinking about archival material like we see here, right? This is a student, Elizabeth Eckford, entering Little Rock Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957 after the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court ruling, which desegregated American schools. And in fact, when I show students this photo to kick off our civil rights unit, they can tell me all about it, right? And they are certain in their hearts and in their minds and in their ethical constitutions that civil rights happen elsewhere and at some other time. In that they don't necessarily touch that history, hold that history, or own that history, and that thinking about civil rights history means thinking about the sins of the South. And again, we would say to them that's partially true. So our students really can't fathom racism, structural discrimination, systemic discrimination as existing somehow in the Northeast. And we don't fault them for that, right? But we do, Helen and I surely have begun to ask ourselves in tandem with Rashi colleagues, what are our duties or burdens as teachers who are aware of the prior knowledge our students carry into the classroom? What can we do to make these histories more complex for them, and also to give them ownership, right, of the history in some sort of way? So Helen, can you speak a little bit to the way our students think about maybe the role of Jews during the civil rights era?
Helen, can you unmute?
Absolutely. Sorry about
Thanks.
that. So what students come to us is they come with a very particular narrative, particularly of this arc of Jews coming, particularly from the North, entering into the South, usually as equal partners within the civil rights movement. Jews acting as freedom riders, Jews doing a lot of activism, participating. We see these iconic really demigod-like figures. We hear about Abraham Joshua Heschel marching with Martin Luther King in Selma. We hear about we are in Boston, obviously, so we think of, that's where we took our name from the presentation, is the Larry Tobin Bridge, right? We think of the Freedom Seder, and we think of all these wonderful things that Jewish activists have done to partner in civil rights. What they don't always hear is, what about the role of Southern Jews? What about the role of Black Jews? What about the broader scope of things? And that adds more nuance to the history and adds those really adds to the historical narrative. And we're doing a disservice by not including those narratives in our teaching. And so that is what we're hoping to bring as part of this unit. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Helen. And I just want to be clear, and I think this is something we're going to reiterate again. We'll see this in future slides, but also hear this from us. We are encouraging students to do history as an active verb by using archival primary source materials in consultation with secondary materials. That is messy, complex, contingent, very much on purpose. And it's not, and Helen and I have talked a lot about this, we are never seeking to say to students, that to be historically accurate and look at hard truths and think about the complexity and totality of certain groups' roles in history is to say that that group of people is either all good or all bad. We're trying to get our students to wade inside the gray area of human behavior and understand that everybody makes very complex choices in life. within a specific context. And they do so with the information that's available to them. And that when we do history, we are not looking for heroes and villains per se. We're looking for that wide spectrum of human beings who exist somewhere in between those two poles, and who simply on a day-to-day basis are unsure of how to properly act because life is complicated. And so we carry this sort of understanding, right? We always hope to draw a through line for our students, because if you do histories of slavery, histories of Reconstruction, Jim Crow era segregation, desegregation, civil rights, and then leading up into the present, the through line we want to draw for our students is that this history isn't over, right? The chronology doesn't end at a certain point. We would really like to, if we could, dispel with a progress narrative that reassures everyone all the time that everything will always be okay. At a school that is tzedek oriented, that is justice oriented, like the Rashi school, we do think it is our duty to point out to students that history is now, justice is now in the present, rights seemingly secured one day can be lost the next, and that we are all active agents with the power to change society.
Exactly, exactly. Which is why we're wanting to build in not only the bedrock, but additional things to add complexity. So Scott, why don't you talk about the bedrock and what we are teaching them, just kind of the base level, before we add in the complexity.
Great.
Helen, can you
Thank
put
you.
your slide,
Yeah,
can you
so
put your
I
slide deck
have the
back?
great benefit of teaching Rashi students across, thank you, Helen. I have the great benefit of teaching Rashi students actually across both the sixth and the seventh grade, which is unique. It means that I get to hold their curriculum for 2 years and draw these long continuities and threads of analysis, as they are becoming young adolescent learners. And it means that they get used to my style, and my sort of narrative approach, and they get to do the same thing with Helen. So our bedrock is that we're thinking about almost 400 years of what would be thought of as, American history, which is a story about people getting to become or lose status as insiders and outsiders within a society over time, and the causes and effects that would drive that gaining or losing of status. So students understand by the time they get to the seventh grade for our civil rights unit, they understand what slavery was. They understand the deliberate choices that folks made to establish a global trade of human beings. They understand that family separation was a key component of the chattel slavery system. They understand why people fought the Civil War and that there were lots of differences of opinion about the appropriate way to abolish slavery or not, right? Or to secede from the Union. They understand what Reconstruction is. They understand that Reconstruction had successes and failures, and that the major failure of the Reconstruction period was the establishment of Jim Crow segregation that lasted for roughly 100 years. Uh, and then they understand that civil rights activism is not a neat and tidy business, but that lots of different people had lots of different opinions about how to improve society, how to heal the world, right, and engage in the act of tikkun olam. And so by the time Helen and I, and I'm going to turn it back over to Helen in just a second, by the time that Helen and I try and make this history more complex from a specifically Jewish perspective and lens, what we have done is given them a really firm bedrock of information and sort of background of information to grapple with and also to refer back to as we're adding new information on. Helen, from your view as the Jewish studies teacher, what are the layers of contingency and complexity that you're adding?
Right. So some of the voices that we're adding, as I noted before, is kind of the voices of Southern Jews, voices of Black Jews, as well as kind of the later speaking about Black radicalism and racism as an enduring problem in the present. So specifically, I actually wanted to bring attention to the image I have on the right. So this is actually a gravestone of Samuel A. Bierfield, who is believed to be the first Jew that was lynched by the KKK. Most people hear the story of uh, Leo Frank, who was lynched in the 1920s, I believe, around Atlanta. Samuel Buford was actually around 1867, 1868, in a town called Franklin, Tennessee, just south of Nashville. And he was a business owner, and he was murdered alongside his employee, who was Black, Lawrence Bowman, by what ended up being the KKK. This was really in the midst of Reconstruction, really in the midst of Reconstruction. And the local synagogue at the time called him a radical Republican and really disavowed themselves of him as part of the Jewish community, the established Jewish community. They called him a carpetbagger and really wanted to disavow themselves from him. But they did allow him to be buried, or his body to be buried in the Jewish cemetery. After all, a Jew is a Jew. But it's interesting that even today, his name is misspelled. So this picture was actually taken relatively recently. I go and visit the cemetery whenever I visit my family down in Nashville. I'm from Nashville. And it's still misspelled to this day, despite this temple that owns the cemetery being very progressive, very politically liberal synagogue that considers themselves very progressive in their racial justice initiatives. And so talking about that history and talking about how Jews in the South, both during Reconstruction, during the Civil Rights Movement, and even today, have still wrestled with history and are wrestling with history, I think is an important message to teach kids, an important message to talk about from a historical lens. And it's important to have all these different complexities when recording history. That it's not just right. It's not just one narrative when looking at history. And that's one of the great things that oral history allows us to do, because in a lot of ways, this is living history. We have, especially within the civil rights movement, we have people who lived during that era, or the post-civil rights movement. People are still alive that understand what after that era looked like, even today. And they can get that more nuanced understanding from oral history of that, which is what we hope to do as part of this unit.
Helen, can we stay on this slide for just a second?
Absolutely.
I just want to augment and really complement something that Helen is saying here, which is when you hold up the case of Samuel Bierfeld for students, right? This is how you add, when we're thinking about complexity and contingency to the history, this is how people who might be bystanders, folks who might choose to not become active in sort of civil rights activism at a certain point. This is the starkness of choices that they were faced with, right? If you see someone like Bierfeld being lynched, right, as a white appearing Jew in the South, simply for having a collegial relationship with a black employee, right, that lays out a series of choices that are terrifying, right, for folks to think about. I might not become involved in the civil rights movement if I watch my compatriots be lynched, right, for doing so. So again, this is for our students, what we're trying to show is it's not as easy as seeing a movement, seeing an impetus to change the world and just entering into that movement, right? There are choices that people make, and they can be life or death choices. And I think that Helen does a beautiful job working with the students to bring the Bierfeld case to light because they don't know about it. And it's one of those sort of interesting doorways into thinking about history in a more complex way that otherwise they would not be, it would not be held up in front of them if they were to do a simple Wikipedia search, right, of the civil rights era or even post-Reconstruction histories.
Yes, and we also bring in some voices of Southern Jews, from Selma, and what it was like of, if living in Selma as a Jew during the Civil Rights era when a bunch of people were coming from the North, yeah, you could stick your head out and be on the quote unquote right side of history, and you also had to live with these people every day. And so that's a discussion that we talk about in classes, and how the fear of anti-Semitism is a very strong motivator to be a bystander in a lot of ways. And that's a new thing for students to wrestle with.
So Helen and I, when we were working on this unit last summer, we came up with a couple of enduring understandings that we share between our two classes. We just want to pause for 30 seconds and give folks a chance. We won't narrate these. We want to give you just 30 seconds to read these. And if you have commentary on them, let's hold that for questions, please, or comments at the end. But what we see is a pretty deep overlap between what we're trying to do in Jewish studies and social studies. So we'll give you just a 30-second block to take a look at these enduring understandings. Um, so how do we get there, right? How do we get students doing all this messy work, getting really excited? What's the method? What's the teaching method, right, that you can use or the approach to get students to really roll up their sleeves and care about something that seems like it was far off and long ago? And our answer to that, when we thought about this really deeply, is the practice of oral history. Um, if we look at the graphic organizer or representation we have here on the right-hand side of the slide, oral history can accomplish quite a lot as a practice that is ethical in a community over time. We're thinking about at Rashi, we can't accomplish all of these things with our grade 7 students, but we do think that we're doing something educational. We know we're building community, and I'll come back to that. We know we're trying to flip students' script of a seemingly fixed script and time period in their minds. And we know we're trying to get them to be ethical as students as they are conducting actual interviews with people who lived through the civil rights era. And I'll talk more about those ethics in just a moment. Oral history is more than just interviewing someone. It is sitting with someone and asking them about a very specific moment or time period in their life, and then attempting at the end of that interview to sit thoughtfully with the information you're given and ask yourself, what does this interview show me when placed alongside the broader mosaic of information about what I think I know about a time period, right? So students in grade 7 have done 2 oral history projects this year to prepare them by the time we get to our civil rights unit. They've done an oral history with folks who lived through 9/11 or the 9/11 time period. And they also conducted oral histories with family members who have immigrant backgrounds. And at Rashi, one of the great advantages of doing that type of work is that nearly all or all of our students have someone in their family, chosen kin, or friend network who they can talk to about the experience of being a migrant, an immigrant, or refugee. We, as we mentioned at the outset of this presentation, we firmly believe that humanities done right is social emotional learning. It gives students the skills to foster their relationality, to be an active listener, and to ask themselves what it means to exist in a community alongside other people. So we don't think social emotional learning is a buzzword of a time period. We actually think it's a tried and true practice of the humanities that has great value for students and will always have value for students. We also know, and we'll show you just a bit at the end of this presentation today, that oral history puts students in the driver's seat. It allows them to sit with someone who had experienced something and have a real conversation, unvarnished, in a hands-on way that they then get to take and take with themselves and think about for a lifetime. In that sense, we see this as being multi-generational, right? Not just that you interviewed someone who's older than you, but that you carry this wisdom and knowledge with you into the future for generations to come. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we have this wonderful partnership. We share a campus with Newbridge on the Charles Hebrew Senior Life. And so students interact with Newbridge residents kind of throughout their years at Rashi. And in middle school, they primarily work with residents experienced memory loss. But we wanted to really bridge that connection and have another outlet for students to interact with residents. And so we wanted to do an oral history project where students could interview residents who grew up during the civil rights era or post-civil rights era, particularly in the areas of Mattapan, Dorchester, and Roxbury, which used to be very, very strong, thriving Jewish communities that experienced large amounts of white flight, particularly of the Jewish communities that ultimately ended up moving out to Newton, to Brookline, to Needham, etc. And we wanted students to interview these residents. And so we're setting up so that we'll have hopefully about 10 residents that students will interview and record these oral histories about what it was like growing up in those times, what it was like to leave those areas, um, and really develop just that human connection, and record that history, because it really adds that complexity, and it's a good thing for our students to interact with adults and see this history firsthand. Um, and again, putting a face to history is helpful. And part of this is we're expecting our students to wade through the gray, through their interviews. They might experience some things, or hear some things that they might not expect. And the things will maybe lead to some interesting directions. But we are excited to see what the students get out of the experience, what the residents get out of the experience. It's always really a highlight whenever the students get to interact with Newbridge residents. And so we're very much looking forward to um, seeing how this pans out this year.
Um, can we stay on this slide for just a second? I just want to come back
Absolutely.
to thanks, Helen. I just want to come back to the topic of ethics, right? When we think about the way that students do this work, and we see that as cutting in numerous directions. Helen and I have a duty before the kids sit down with the Newbridge residents to say, this is what the students have learned. This is what they expect to talk to you about. They want to know why it is that as the demographics of your neighborhoods changed, you felt compelled to leave. And they will be given a list of questions that the students will be asking them ahead of time. So they're not totally gobstopped and just knocked over by the questions and totally taken off guard. So the Newbridge residents are aware as to what's being expected of them. And it's essential that we set the same expectation for students.
Mhm.
We've done a lot of work, Helen and I, this year, trying to get our students to pause in the moment, to be present in the moment and to take deep reflective breaths and not simply run through a list of questions as if they were checkboxes to move down, but to actually sit with human beings and listen to their responses and to build wait time into conversations that they're having with other human beings so that wait time breeds follow-up questions. So if someone says something that you are unsure of, you simply want to know more about, demonstrate the intellectual curiosity and the maturity to just slow down and say, can you please tell me more about that? Or I don't think I understood your response. Or I want to be a good partner to you. Can you please say more about that? This is something we've been attempting to model again and again and again in our classes this year. And we do think it's a durable way to connect your learning goals to the type of school community you want to create, right? To embody and live these sort of community principles in the classroom. So again, there's nothing willy-nilly about the sort of work that we're doing. The most unexpected thing, and that's kind of the beauty of this, is the answers that the residents might provide our students, and then the way the students have to sit and think with that.
Yeah, and then I know another big skill that we're hoping students come out of this is also uh, the skills of being able to sit and have an honest and mature conversation with older adults, in a mature and respectful way. I know I'm a Southern Jew, as my bio said. I'm a big fan of etiquette, and so we're purposefully putting this interview portion right before their trip to Alabama. And so I'm actually probably sitting with the entire seventh grade before their trip to Alabama, where we are doing a full Southern etiquette how to. Um, we're learning all about not putting elbows on the table and all that stuff. But this is part of it. This is how do you have a mature conversation, treat your elders with respect, and also see the best in people you might have different opinions with, you might see things differently with, and how do you hear their story, even if it might surprise you, even if it is different than what you had hoped. And so that is one of the skills that we hope to instill in these kids, is able to sit with another human being and see the other human being that they are interviewing. So.
Oh, Helen, Amy is just pointing out that she can't discern a Southern accent coming from you today. Okay, so You'll notice that much of what Helen and I have been discussing is admittedly anticipatory, right? The students they have not undertaken this civil rights unit just yet, but we have done oral history work at other times this year in grade 7 with our students, and it's been really rich. And we just wanted to give a snippet. We did some exit ticket reflecting with students after they spoke with family members, chosen kin, friends, about their immigration experiences. How did immigration shape who you are as a human being? How did it shape your sense of being a Jew? Right? Did it affect your sense of Jewishness or alter it over time? And this is what some of our students are saying, that they were able to connect with adults in their lives in new ways, that history felt more real and personal, that they felt like they were an inheritor of history, that they now carry a history they feel an obligation to do something with or about, and that they are asking themselves what it means to inherit history. I just want to be clear, this is so different than students passively learning facts, dates, timelines, right? Again, this sort of work begs students to get involved in some sort of way and really put their arms around the material being shared with them. So what we want to do is just very briefly, we understand, we want to get to our Q&A. We want to very briefly just share a clip of an oral history project that one of our grade 7 students completed this year, interviewing their father. I'll cue Helen in just a second here because Helen is sharing our clip today. It's one of our grade 7 students. His name is Asaf. And Asaf sat with his father, who immigrated from Israel to the US 20 years ago. And he was asking his father what it was like to attempt to assimilate into American culture. And Asaf practices, in the clip we're about to see, this wait time that we've been working on and this follow-up questioning that we've been working on with the grade 7 students this year. Asaf is just not convinced that the question is being answered that he's asking. He's not convinced it's being answered in depth or with complexity. And so very kindly, he pushes his own father to keep answering the question. And we also talk about how oral history is consent-based. If someone says they can't go near something, you back off, right? You pivot and you go to a backup series of questions or another series of questions. But we love this clip, and it's short because this is a learned skill. This is something that took time to cultivate in a student. In the end, we're also just proud of the student. We think that what the work they're doing is thoughtful. Helen, would you mind sharing that clip from 9 minutes and 36 seconds? This is Asaf talking to his father and asking those probing follow-up questions.
We can't hear it.
Helen, you just might have to unmute yourself on your computer.
Or it might be like a share audio thing.
Answered part of this question.
Then you don't have to ask it.
But I'm going to ask the beginning. What did it feel like to blend into the culture? Like, did you feel like lonely, left out?
Yeah, definitely had some times where I was like, this is crazy. Crazy. And I was like, I don't want to be in a place where, people behave this way. The typical way that Israel looks at Americans, like, hey, how are you? Right? But you don't really care. It's just saying hello. Right? It's like in Israel, you'd say, hey, what's up? You don't really. And I was like, oh, nobody cares. I'm trying to tell him how I am. And he says he doesn't care. Like, oh, they're so superficial. It was just a mismatch, right? A miscommunication and expectations. And but it was, there were times where I was like, maybe I shouldn't stay here. Maybe I should go back.
Okay. What was most surprising about the culture? What popped out the most to you?
The most surprising was that being in Israel, which is a very small country, everybody talks the same, behaves the same. I realized that the United States, you can't say Americans are. It depends where you are. Different places will have different accents. Different places will behave differently towards you. One would be colder to you, but once you get to know them, very warm. The other one would be like, oh, everybody's friendly, but they are very, on the surface, like they don't care as much. It had to do with how cold and how hot it was. It had to do with, south and north and west and accents. That I suddenly realized that I had a professor that I didn't understand a word that he was saying. He came from Savannah, Georgia.
So Asaf asked his father the same version of that question repeatedly over a 4-minute period until he got the answers he was looking for, right? And that you keep getting more complexity, right, each time the question is answered. So that's something we're trying to instill in students. When you are investigating something as a detective of information, right, don't rest until you feel as if you've reached the complexity you're looking for. Helen, could you please go to 19 minutes and 57 seconds in that clip? Asaf, at the end of this clip, just puts a really wonderful reflection that we want all of our students to do as well. It's concise, surely, but he really beautifully hits some of the notes that we hope students take out of this oral history work. And Helen, please go ahead.
In this project, I learned more deeply about my dad's immigration journey, and also I learned how to conduct an interview very well. This is important to me because in the future I will need to conduct more interviews and learn about other people's history, and this is very helpful. This project is helpful for this. Also, this is also important to me because my dad's history is also my history. So, yeah.
And that might be a really important place for Helen and I to end before we, of course, thank you for having us, which is to say, we want this work to be important to students. It means everything to us that the work is actually meaningful to them, and then they get to do this in authentic ways. Of course, I'm going to turn it back over to Helen. I just want to say thank you before we get into the Q&A. Thanks again for having us. And Helen, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the huge impetus of this project was in this revamp of this unit was to make sure that the students, all of this is kind of built around their big Alabama trip where they're actually seeing a lot of these places that there were these huge moments in the civil rights movement, where they're actually taking all of this information, using it, and actually making it relevant to their lives and finding meaning making and bringing it to themselves and putting it in a context that makes sense for them and localizing it to the greater Boston area because it is easy to envision all of these things as something that happened way back when, all the way in the South, when it is still living history. And it is living history that happened here too. And that is what we hope to instill in the students. So yeah, I think we'll open it up maybe to some questions if folks have. So if there are any questions, if you would like to type them in the chat.
Or we could just chat as a Rashi staff.
Or that too.
That's what we have here. Helen and Scott, thank you so much. Amy, aren't they awesome?
Amazing. This was so much fun to listen to. I'm convinced that lots of people will listen to the recording as well. We didn't have a huge group here live with us, but people will listen to the recording.
I saw a few of former JCDS colleagues on the call for a while there. That was fun to see. So I'm going to pretend like I am a teacher from another Jewish day school to ask the question, when did you find the time to collaborate? How much collaboration time was needed in order for you to feel like this was a successful partnership?
So we spent about a week on this, I think, over the summer, last summer. We really just sat down over, about maybe 20 hours, just over the course of a week, and really just sat down and hammered out what does because we had two separate units where we were doing civil rights things. And we were like, okay, these should be combined in some way. How can we combine them? So what were we doing that was similar and that we could kind of mesh and kind of not double teach? And then what were ways that we could complement each other? And then what were ways that we could kind of come together at the end for one collective project, because it doesn't make sense for in May for the students to have two generalist projects, in addition to a trip. So yeah.
Hey, can I just follow up on that for a minute or go a little bit deeper? I'm wondering, what is it about the culture at Rashi that allows that initial conversation to happen, right? Because you're teaching Judaics, Scott is teaching social studies. Granted, you're both teaching middle school, and I imagine there are middle school teacher, faculty meetings and so forth. But what got you to that point of, oh my God, we're teaching basically the same topic from two different angles. We should collaborate.
I mean, part of it came from I came into this job from an interdisciplinary lens. So I think it was my first year that I think Jen was head of the middle school at that point, and kind of wanted us, my colleagues at that time, to create a kind of a unified unit around the civil rights movement. And for whatever reason, it didn't really come together at that point. And it's just kind of always stuck with me of like, oh, we really should do something about this. And then this was the year that it kind of actually came to fruition.
Um, y- yes, in every way to what Helen is saying. And then I would also merely add just maybe a point or two to that, which is to say, well, I think when I was interviewing for my job at Rashi now 2 years ago, it's my second year, I saw in the interview process it sort of being advertised that this is a really collaborative place. And it's one of the reasons I bit and pursued the job so vigorously, right? Because I think at a certain stage, I'm in the middle stage of my life and my career. I'm now more able to do collaboration because I feel a little more confident in my abilities and then more willing to hear where that I don't know what I don't know. And it's with Helen that I found a sort of kinship, right? In saying, I don't think I teach this in its totality in the way I want. And she was saying the same thing, right? And so um, we both, Helen and I now share a supervisor. We had had conversations with our supervisors in the past and said, we need some devoted time to think through this thing. We need some resources to do it. There was a curriculum stipend that was available to us. That's enticing and it's appetizing, but I would say the intellectual component of this, right, and getting to form a relationship with the colleague was really the driving force, plus the supervisory space to make it happen. We were really encouraged. Emily Charton's in the room right now, right? Jen Blum is in the room right now, and so I think those folks are walking the talk at the moment that they want collaborative work being done. And so we knew we had a green light from proverbially like the top down to make that happen. And I think that really matters at schools. I think when you don't feel that your garden's being watered or nurtured, you're not as inclined for the collaboration. So it does make a difference.
Amy, the one of the things that I found so exciting about Rashi that just was here, the things you inherit are the summer stipends. I think it's a pretty significant part of our culture that staff will apply for and then have the ability to earn stipends to do good work over the summer. And like how great that Helen and Scott wanted to do this and then did it. And our children are the benefit. So I think that's also part of the ether of the school.
And that's just something that you put into your budget every year?
Interestingly enough, that you should ask this, Amy. We had our ASNE accreditation pre-meeting yesterday with the team that's going to be coming over in November. And 10 years ago, one of the suggestions was that we increase our professional development opportunities. And since that 10-year ago recommendation, Rashi's done, I think, a really good job, if I look at the arc, at building in opportunities for PD, not just for staff to go, but for staff to do their own work in. And I think both of those are just as important. Jen, am I saying all of those things right? I want to make sure I get the institutional knowledge correct.
Yeah, no, I think you have it there.
So the ASNE accreditation was our impetus for it. And I can't wait to see what they unearth this time around. They're coming back in November and we'll see. But because of that work from the objective outside looking in, saying your teachers need some more, opportunities to grow, and because of who we are, we turned that into summer stipend work. And it has been it's been in there since 5 years, 4 years.
I was gonna say, I think 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
This unit in and of itself, I think is an excellent example of like exactly like a like the gift that you can get from this, right? You have the collaboration between the Jewish studies and the secular. You have all the complexity of navigating the world that is. You have the sense of living history. You have the really intentional planning for both the content and the critical thinking skills, but also like the interview skills and um the cultural knowledge that students need to go and travel. It brings so much, the SEL pieces, it brings so much of what we do, the Newbridge piece together in such a beautiful way that it's amazing. And it amazed me this summer when they were doing it, and I feel even more amazed to get to hear the presentation and kind of be walked through that again. So thank you both.
This is awesome. Are there any other, since I've got all these Rashi faculty folks and administrators on the call here, are there any other collaborative curriculum projects either ongoing now in the school or planned for the future?
We have night in the eighth grade. That's a fun one. So Becca Berwick, who's our eighth grade English teacher, Sharon Clevenger, our rabbi who's on earlier, who also teaches eighth grade Jewish studies, and Jamie Brody, who teaches eighth grade social studies, are doing a three-teacher collaboration on Eli Wiesel's night. And, I was with the eighth graders this morning. They found out last night that they're going to Prague and Budapest and not going to Israel. We made that final decision. But Eli Wiesel is from Hungary, so they're going to get to visit the country of from where he's from. So yes, that's another example. Jen, you have any other in the hopper that you can share?
Yep, on hiatus this year because we adopted a new math curriculum, so we're trying to do that with Fidelity, but we've had a project between eighth grade English and math looking at they read 12 Angry Men. It's also with drama. They do a stage reading of that, and they look at the statistics from the criminal justice system and kind of dig into the lens of justice through racial justice and gender and a number of other identity pieces through that, which is really neat. Second grade has a great unit that integrates social studies with Israel and water and science. It's if you were to pause, we could go through every grade and talk about a number of different units that not just draw on the cross-cutting skills, but also really link the content. And I think our experience becomes richer and richer each time we do that, as well as Helen and Scott have done that with this unit, because it maximizes the connections that the kids make in terms of their learning. It makes everything really sticky. It makes it relevant and meaningful. And it also maximizes our efficiency with time, right? Which at a Jewish day school where you have a lot of competing needs and everything is important and central to what we do, using your time well is just an incredibly important aspect.
You know what I'm thinking about right now too, which I think I want to share in front of Scott and Helen, because I'm interested about your thoughts on this. Everything that Jen just talked about is social justice related, like all of the various interdisciplinary projects that we do. And I think oftentimes as a school and a faculty, we feel stuck because we don't feel like we're really doing the social justice that we want to be doing out in the world with today's times and today's issues. And yet all through Rashi's ecosystem, at every turn, these children are getting the foundation of what it means to be justice oriented. So I don't know, I'm feeling grateful in this moment for that.
Awesome.
Yeah, me too. I think just to add a tiny bit onto that, I mean, I think what's really interesting is I think a lot in teaching practice about how do you actually convey that we're doing something that's justice oriented without like really hammering kids over the head with that, or families, right? Or your colleagues. And I think it's a more, for me, I'm starting to find now, and I don't know if Helen would ascend to this point, it's like absolutely more of a subtle practice you have to build into your teaching. And that just takes a lot of time. And it goes back to Amy's original question, or pardon me, maybe it was Emily's original question of like, how did you budget the time to do this? And so it's not just you have to be, from our perspective as teachers, teaching the content you want to teach. You have to think about how do I do it and what does it mean to do it in a way that lives into the school's values.
Mhm.
And that is very much based, as Emily was saying, in the culture of Rashi, right? That is baked into your school culture. And I don't think
We
that's
want
true
more.
I don't think that's true for everyday school, right? I think I mean, I'm sure that there are certainly other schools for which that's the case, but I think it is very much baked into the culture of Rashi. Awesome. Folks, thank you. This was an amazing discussion. I'm very, very appreciative. I wish I had learned with teachers like you. It would have been a very different school experience in many ways. So thank you for all that you do and all that you will continue to do. Our final Lunch and Learn of the year is scheduled for Monday, May 18th. It's going to be facilitated by GAN. I'm not sure of the topic quite yet, but we hope that you'll join us again then. I want to wish everybody a wonderful Pesach holiday and a great spring break. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take
Amy.
care.
Bye,
Go
everyone.
Bye. Thank
Rashi.
Bye
you.
bye. Thank
Bye.
you.